Hey, what's up? Welcome to the Flutter beginner course. My name is Mitch and I'm going to be teaching complete beginners with no coding experience at all on how to create beautiful apps with Flutter. The reason I made this course is because this is something I wish I had when I first started getting into Flutter app development. And this ain't a joke, but this can pretty much replace a computer science degree because I'm going to teach you assuming you have no coding experience at all. I put myself in lots of student debt, so you don't have to. Now, you don't need any programming experience, but one thing you do need is that I ask you to have Flutter installed on your computer and you know how to open up a new Flutter project. If you can do that, then I'll take care of the rest. So we're going to start from the very beginning with the basics of programming fundamentals. And then everything in Flutter is a widget, so I'll teach you the essential widgets every developer needs to know. Then we're going to look at navigation and how to navigate around to different screens. Then we're going to look at the difference between stateless and stateful widgets. And then a really important concept is user input. And then I'll show you how to put this all together and create a functional to-do app. And I'll also show you how you can save the data in the phone's local storage. And then we're going to finish off with an e-commerce type app that has a very beautiful UI and the necessary functionality like adding items to the cart and things like that. So that's the plan and structure for this course. Now, some general tips before we start. The first thing is, remember, you have the entire internet at your fingertips. So if you come across something you don't understand, the act of formulating the question and searching for the answer is how we learn. And the second thing is, what's more important than taking this course is for you to actually just sit down in front of a computer and code. There are many little nuances that are difficult to learn just by reading or just by watching someone else do it. So make sure that you put in some time and some hours into learning this. Cool, so that's all the housekeeping stuff out of the way. I'm ready if you are, so let's start from the very beginning. So I've opened up a brand new Flutter project and you should just get this demo counter app. Now I'm just going to delete everything below the main function so I can teach you how to do this from scratch. So with any code base, everything always starts off from this main function and you can see we're just running our app. So let's just create our app real quick. Now in Flutter, there's two types of widgets we can create, a stateless widget and a stateful widget. I'm going to just go with a stateless widget for now. I'll explain more about the difference between the two later on. So the first thing you always need to do is just to return a material app. And this will just be the basis for everything. So if you save this, it'll just be a dark screen because it's got nothing in it. And in the home, we're going to just specify a scaffold. So this will just be a blank app and it will be the basis for everything else that we create. Now, one thing is you can see that debug banner, which is there just to show that we're still developing the app. Now, I don't like to see that banner, so I'm just going to set it to be false. Yep, so we'll just have a nice clean app. And the other thing is you see these blue squiggles. It's because they want us to put a const tag, but don't worry too much about that. I'll explain that a bit later on. Now, before we look at any app development, the first thing that we should do is to look at the programming fundamentals. So I'm going to teach this as if it's for people that have no coding experience at all. And I'm just going to get you up to speed on all of the basic concepts that we need to code. So the very first idea is a variable. So we can store different types of information into variables. Now, the sort of main variables I'm going to show you here. So the first one is a string. Now a string is just a string of characters, which in other words just means text. So we can say like, my name is Mitch Coco. And the next important variable is an integer. So like a whole number, say like an age, I'm 27. And then you've got double, which is for numbers that have a decimal point, right? So for example, like pi. And then the last essential variable we need to know is a boolean. And boolean just means if it's a true or false value. So it's just one or the other. So for example, is beginner? Yes, I'm a beginner, true. So these are the main variables that you'll need to know. There are other variables that you'll pick up along the way, but I think these four are the most important ones. And so now that we have information stored in different variables, we can now look at some basic operators. So the first thing is just the basic math operators. Now, if you know any level of math, this should be sort of familiar for you. So I'm just going to run through them anyway. So we got the plus, the minus, we got the multiply, divide, and also remainder. So if I just go through these, let's say for example 1 plus 1 we know is 2. 4 minus 1 we know is 3. And in code for the multiplying button we use the asterisk sign. So we know 2 times 3 is 6. And for the division we use a slash symbol. And finally this percent is for the remainder. So if I say like 9 divided by 4 gives us a remainder of 1. So these 5 basic math operators are pretty much all you need to know. So we've got the add, subtract, multiply, divide, and the remainder. Cool. So by the way, if you want to test any of this out, so I told you everything starts off at the main function. So we could just go and do a quick print here. Say for example, let's print hi there. And if you bring up your console and you restart this, you can see it'll just print in our console hi there. So if I just play around with some of these numbers, we could say 1 plus 5 and it'll give us 6. So we could say like 9 remainder 4 gives us 1. So yeah, we can always use some little print statements just to see what's going on. But now we have the basic math operators down. The next thing we need to know is the comparison operators. So for these ones, we have, say, starting with the equals one. So this kind of double equals, it checks if the two values are the same or not, right? So 5 equals to 5 is definitely true. We also have the not equal to, which is represented by the exclamation mark. So 2 is not equal to 3, that is true. We also have the greater than signs, right? 3 greater than 2. We also got the less than sign. And just like in math, we have the greater or equal to, as well as the less than or equal to. So hopefully you're following on so far. So if I just come back to my main function and just play around with it a little bit, if I print 9 is equal to 9, you can see it's true. Let's do another one, say 9 is not equal to 9. We know that is false. Sweet, which brings us to the last type of operators, which is the logical operators. So for this one, the first one is just the AND symbol, so AND operator. So this returns true if both sides are true. So for example, we could say is beginner and the other condition is age less than 18 years old. So we had some variables at the top that we created from the beginning. So we can see that is beginner, we are true. And the age, I'm 27 years old. So is beginner is true, but age is less than 18 is false. So this one should be returning false, because for this to be true, we need both sides to be true. Now, there are situations where you might want to use an OR operator. And for this one, it's only true if at least one of the sides are true. So is beginner, we know that the left-hand side here is true, but the right-hand side is false. But since one of them at least is true, then this will return true overall. And then the last thing, which we kind of talked about before, is the NOT operator. So this one just returns the opposite value, which is this exclamation mark. So if I say exclamation mark is beginner, then we're going to return false. Cool, so if I try this again, now since we have our variables in this stateless widget, let's go down to this build method and we can just try to print some things here. So let's say like that OR operator. You can see it returns true. Cool, so we looked at some variables. We looked at the basic operators that we need to manipulate this information. And so just to sum up, just to make sure we're on the same page, every code base starts off in the main function. We're running our app and this will build the widget down here. So let's continue this on. So now let me teach you about some control flow. So that's for right now. At the top, let's call this programming fundamentals. And now we're looking at the control flow. So control flow is how we're going to tell the computer how to get things done. So for example, the very first one that anyone needs to learn about is the if statement. So the way it works is if certain condition is true, then let's do something. So for example, we could say if age is greater or equal to 18, just print you are an adult. Right, so let's try this out. You can see, yep, if I restart this, our age is definitely above 18, so yep, we are an adult. Now the next thing is we can have an if else. So just check for a certain condition and then we can have all of the other cases. So just going off of our example, if age is greater or equal to 18, print you are an adult. Else, print you are not an adult. So this will just account for all the other situations. So just to show you here, if I say like I'm 5 years old, then it'll just go through the control flow and tell me that I'm not an adult. Cool, let's change that back to 27. So we looked at if else. And one more thing is an else if. So what this does is it just checks for another condition. Right, so the example I can give for this one is if your age is less than 13, then you can only watch G-rated movies. Else if you're less than 18, then you can watch G-rated and also PG-13 rated movies. Right, so this will just go in order and check the first condition. Okay, so if I don't qualify for that first section, then it will go on to the next condition and so on. And then at the very end of all of this, you can have another else just to get the remaining cases. Right, so if none of those conditions are true, then at the very end, you can watch G, PG, and also R-rated movies. So if, else, and else if, these are the fundamental control flows for any programming language. So you're going to be using this a lot. Now, sometimes you might be using it too much. So for example, let's say we have a grade, like a school grade of B. And I just want to know by checking the grade, how well the student's doing, right? So we could definitely use an if statement here. Say like, if grade is A, then print excellent. Else if grade is B, print good. If grade is C, say fair. And then you can keep going down, right? Now, if you find yourself using too many if statements like this, it might be a better idea to use a switch statement. Just to show you, if I was to do the exact same thing but with a switch statement, it says, okay, switch, and we're looking at the grade, and we can think about the different cases that this grade could be. The first case, it could be an A, and so if it's an A, then print excellent, and then we can have the case for B, have the case for C, and so on. And then similar to the very last else statement that accounts for all of the other situations, in a switch statement, we can just place that in a default. So if none of those cases are true, then just print invalid grade. So these two blocks of code do the exact same thing. But if you have a lot of cases, then it might be better just to use a switch statement instead of an if statement. Right, so yep, this is the general structure for a switch statement. Awesome, which brings us to loops. Now, just to sort of illustrate the need for loops, I like to think of an example. So I want you to imagine you have a box of 10 colored crayons and you want to draw a circle with each one. So one way we could do it is we can say, draw a circle with the first crayon, then draw a circle with the second crayon, and then the third, and so on, right? But instead of giving the instruction like this, it's much easier for us to just say, for each crayon in the box, draw a circle. So this is what a loop is going to be used for. So the very first type of loop is called a for loop. And so if I was to just show you here, the requirements for a for loop is we have to have an initialization, we need to have a condition, and also an iteration, which sounds complicated, but if I just show you as a quick example here, for my initialization, I'm going to start with I being 0. So most of the time we just use an integer for this, and you can pick any letter, but I'm just going to pick I. And let's say, okay, starting at 0, and as long as I is less than or equal to 5, then keep incrementing and going through the I. So I equals 0 is our initialization, I is greater than or equal to 5 is our condition, and then I plus plus is our iteration, which I guess I haven't really explained that plus plus what that is. So coming back to our basic operators, let's add it on here. So plus plus just means incrementing by 1. It just means I'm going to add 1 to myself. And similarly, minus minus means we're going to decrease by 1. So these are kind of nice short way hand to do it. So for example, 5 plus plus is just 6. 5 minus minus is 4. So that's what that's doing, right? So that's our iteration. We're just going to keep increasing I by 1. So if I just show you like what this is actually doing, if I print out the I, right? Let's see what happens. So I'm just going to restart this, and you can see starting from 0, it'll keep incrementing by 1 until we get to our condition, which is being less than or equal to 5, right? So it will just go through the loop and print I equals 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if I make the condition say 8, then it's going to print it 8 times. Cool. So that's how you use a for loop on a very basic level. Now, one couple keywords that's going to be helpful is you can actually say something like this. We can say, if I is equal to say 6, then let's break out of this loop. And so if I just run this again, what happens is it's going to start at 0 and it's going to go through until 8. But let's see what actually happened. So we went 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it just stopped. And the reason why it stopped is because we have this little check here saying, if I is equal to 6, then break out of the loop. And so it'll just stop the loop entirely. Now, similar to break, which just breaks out of the loop, we can also have a continue keyword. And what continue does is, if I just show you the behavior first of all, starting from our 0 going to 8, it'll print everything, but it just skips 6, right? So that's our condition here. So if I is equal to 6, then just continue and skip this current iteration. And that's what continue is saying. Cool. So using these, you can actually do a lot of things. Now I'm going to teach you one more type of loop, which is a while loop, which actually looks simpler. So in a for loop, you have to specify the number of times to loop, so that condition. But sometimes if you don't know how many times to loop, then you can use a while loop, which basically just keeps looping until that condition is met. Okay, so for example, right, let's say I've got an integer saying countdown being 5. So while the countdown is still a positive number, then print the number and let's go down. Okay, so this will keep going down until we reach basically 0, right? So if I print this out, starting from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then it just stops, right? So you can also do loops in this way as well. Maybe I should make this look a little nicer. Let's put some lines here just so that our notes look pretty good. But yeah, let me teach you about functions. So we just looked at some cool blocks of code that get stuff done. Now we can organize these blocks of code into functions so that we can reuse them easily later on. So I'm going to create a method here. By the way, functions and methods, they are the same thing. And just to remind everyone, this main function is a function, it's a method. So the whole app starts off by running that main method. And so let's create a very basic one. So I'm just going to say void greet. And let's just say a message here saying, hello, Mitch. So when this widget gets built, let's call that greet method. And then you can see it'll just print it out. And by the way, the word void, what that means is void means that the function returns nothing. Shortly, I'm going to show you some functions that do return something. But this one for now, when it says void, all it does is it just executes whatever's in that function. So I'll show you in just a second a function that actually has a return type. But for now, let's keep it simple and just do void. So we have this very basic function saying greet. Now I'm going to show you how we can have functions that have some parameters. And so what that means is, okay, let's say we have another greet function here. And in this bracket, we can accept a parameter. And so the parameter I want to accept is a string called a name, right? And by the way, we should make sure the function is called something else, like greet person. Cool. So then we can say, all right, print hello. And then also let's just add on the name of whatever we're given. So coming back to our method here, we can say greet person, and you can see it's asking us to provide a name, right? And the type we need to give is a string, you can see here. So I'm just going to say, just as an example, if I say 5, it's not going to work. It's got a red squiggle because it says here that int, you can't give it to a string, right? So we need to give it a string. So I'm going to say, all right, let's give it Steve. And if I just restart this, then there we go. It's just saying, hello, Steve. Cool. Now, just by looking at this, we can see maybe we might need to add like a comma and a space. Yeah, that looks a bit better. But yeah, this is the idea of having some parameters. It's also called arguments. And so you can have many of these parameters as necessary. So maybe you can also ask for an age, right? Then if you're asking for another parameter, you can see there's going to be a red squiggle here that says 2 positional arguments are expected, but only 1 found. Okay, so we can just say 27 or 55. So that's how we work with parameters. And now let's look at a function with a return type. So I showed you and explained earlier that the word void means that the function is not returning anything. So now I'll show you a function that does return something. So instead of using the word void, I'm going to call this method as a type integer. And a very basic function here that we can illustrate as an example is an add function. So I'm going to say, I want 2 integers as the parameters. So integer A, integer B, and I want to return the sum of these 2 integers. So let's store A plus B into another variable called sum. And you can see that the function has a red squiggle here, right? Because the void function from earlier, all it's doing is just executing the code inside. Whereas our add function currently, it's got an integer as a return type, right? So what that means is we have to return something, right? That's what it's saying here. We have to return an int. So you have to say return and then just return the sum. Okay, so how do we actually use this in practice? If I say add, say 3 and 5, the way we kind of write this right now is doing nothing because it's calling the function, but we're not storing this sum anywhere. So because it's returning a certain value, right, we can just print this value straight away, like 8. But it might be a better idea in these sort of situations to store that sum somewhere. So I could say integers my sum and call that add function 3 and 5, and then we can just print my sum. So the main point I want to illustrate here is that this function add actually returns a value, right? And we can store it in our integer called my sum, right? This is different from the void, where the void just executes the code inside, but it doesn't return anything. Awesome. So now that we've gone through most of the basic programming fundamentals, I want to just show you some of the important data structures to be able to store our variables in a nice way. So the very first type of data structure is a list. So we can have like a list of numbers, say 1, 2, 3. And just to sort of connect this back to some of the earlier concepts that we learned, I'm going to create a quick method here called print numbers, and I'm going to show you how we can use a for loop to go through these numbers. So remember before, in a for loop, starting at the initialization of I being 0, we next need a condition, right? And so instead of specifying an actual number, I'm just going to say numbers.length. So just however long that list is. we're going to go through it. And let's just print the numbers for each of them. So if I come to my method down here and I just print numbers and I restart this, you can see it's going to print 1, 2, 3, right? Everything in that list. And just some notes here. The way you can access the information in a list like this is through the index. So in order, it starts off at 0. So for example, like numbers, and you get the number 0, then that'll return that first number. Okay, numbers 1 will give you 2, numbers 2 will give you 3. And so that's what I'm doing here in my for loop. We're just going through each of the numbers, and then the letter I is becoming 0, 1, 2, and kind of iterating through until we print them all out. That's useful. Now, that's pretty smart at sort of knowing what type we give it. Like we just said list, and we didn't specify what type of variables this list should hold. But you can manually specify it if you want, which is a good idea in a lot of situations. So we can say like list, and this list can only hold integers, for example. You can also have like a list that only holds strings, right? So for example, we can say a list of strings that contains names. So Mitch, Sharon, Vince. And we can do the same thing here. So we can say print numbers. We can have another method say print names. And just go through the length of names and print me out all the names. So yep, this is useful for all types of information. Cool, so that was just a list. And just to make this a little bit clearer, just so that you know the idea very clearly, I'm just going to change these to names so that you can see where the numbers are going. Cool, so that's how a list works. The next one I want to show you is called a set, which is very similar to a list, by the way. So a list is an ordered collection of elements, and you can have duplicates. Whereas a set is an unordered collection of unique elements. So it has no duplicates. So we can have a string, a set of strings, and have some unique names. And so this will make sure that there's no duplicates and it's just a set of unique values. And then the last important data structure I want to show you is called a map. So this one stores key value pairs. And so what that means is, let's say I'm going to create a map called a user. We can create a user and say like, okay, the name is Mitch Coco. Age is 27. You can even have like more fields here, like height is 180. And so you can have like a list of information kind of as a key value pair. You're going to see this a lot throughout your app development career. And by the way to sort of access the information in a map is similar to how you access it in a list. So we could say like user, get me the name, and then that's going to print me the Mitch Co. And user, give me the age, it'll just print 27 and so on. So I'm just going to write some notes here just on how we can retrieve the data. Cool, now if you can understand everything I just showed you just then, that's the programming basics that you'll need to know. So the fundamental concepts. Now, if you know the basics and the fundamentals really well, so just the things I showed you just then, it can take you very far. And to be honest, if you can understand what I just showed you, then you've pretty much saved yourself a lot of time and money, because this is pretty much what I learned in my computer science degree. So if you didn't go to a university or something and you didn't get a computer science degree, don't worry, this is basically what we learned. And these ideas and concepts are not just exclusive for Flutter and Dart, this is carried over to other languages as well. So it's quite universal, these concepts. So you have to make sure you understand these programming fundamentals before we move on. Awesome, so now that you know all the programming fundamentals, let's just delete all of these notes. And now I'm going to show you about widgets in Flutter. So everything in Flutter is a widget. And so just to show you again, I just want to delete everything below the main function, and let's just start this from scratch. So our main function is going to run my app, which we're going to create here the stateless widget called my app. And just like before, we're always going to need to have a material app in here. And if you look in the material app for the home, this is where it's going to go to as soon as the app starts up. And the very first widget I want to show you is called a scaffold. Now, if you save this and you run it, a scaffold is, as you can see, it's just a white blank app. And by the way, just before we move further, you can see these blue squiggles. It's because they want us to put the const tag on, but I don't want you to worry too much about what const and final means, because it's not a huge deal for us right now. So if you hover over the blue squiggles, just go to the quick fix and let's say ignore prefer const constructors for this file. So I'll explain a little bit later on about what const and final means. But again, just to keep everyone on the same page, so in our material app, we're going to display a scaffold. And the scaffold is a sort of skeleton widget that holds the different parts of your app. So if I was to show you here, the first thing you can control is the background color. So I could say blue. And by the way, I don't like to see that debug banner, so I'm just going to check that to be false. So yeah, we can choose a background color, and again, if you hover over this, you can see that there's a lot of different shades of that particular color. So you can choose the strength. Cool, so just pick whatever color you want. Now, the other component in the scaffold is, you can see here, the body. So in the body, I want to show you one of the most fundamental widgets in Flutter, which is called a container. And a container is a really flexible widget that you're going to use for many different purposes. So just to illustrate what it does, here we can specify the height and width. Let's say like 300. And let's also give it a color. So if you save that, you can see there's our container. Now, you can wrap this container in another widget called center, which does exactly what it says. It just centers it. And like I said before, everything in Flutter is a widget. So this container widget, you can give it another child and put in another widget. So here, let's introduce the text widget and say Mitch Coco. And you can see there is our text. Now let's just change the color of this container to green so that we can actually see the text. And one thing you're going to use a lot in containers is this padding. So if I just say padding all for 25, you can see it's got some spacing around that text widget now. And there's a lot of different versions of padding you can use. So for example, a lot of the times symmetric is useful. So you can specify it just for the horizontal or just for the vertical. And then the other one you will need to use is the only. So you can specify padding for only a particular direction, like left or top, bottom, right, etc. But for our purpose, let's just say we're going to put a padding of 25 all around. And if you want to decorate this even further, you can go to the decoration. And in this box decoration, if I just show you here and I save it, this is a very common error you'll face. And what it's saying is you cannot provide a color and a decoration. So if you want to specify some further decoration, then you have to put the color inside the decoration. So everything should be working fine. Now, what can you decorate further? Well, one thing that I do all the time is curving the corners. So you can see this border radius. We can make it, say, 20. And you can see the corners are much more rounder. So this is a very common use. And coming back to our text widget, we can, of course, switch up the style. So in the text style, we can of course change the color. We can also change the font size, which, by the way, with any of this stuff, if you hover over it, you can see the information. So it says it defaults to 14. So let's say like 28. And you can also change the font weight, make it bold. So you can change pretty much anything about it. So that's a text widget. Now, the next widget I want to show you here is an icon. Now, by default, Flutter has a lot of icons, so you can just pick whichever ones you want. Now, let's say I'm just going to go for the favorite icon, which is a love heart. And inside this widget, you can change everything you want to. Again, like color. You can change the size, and so on. So this big collection of default icons are going to be pretty useful. Just out of the box, you can use any of these easily. Cool, so we've just been working on the body of the scaffold, which, by the way, if you look at the side here, you can also minimize certain widgets. But let's go to our app bar now, and you can give it the widget called app bar. And again, just to save it, you can see there it is. And then inside this app bar, we can specify the title. And you can also change the background color, of course, to whatever you like. And if you look carefully there, there's a little shadow because it has some elevation. So if you want, you can set the elevation to be 0, and that makes it much more flat with no shadows. Cool. And then if you specify this leading, you can give it an icon for the left-hand side. If you want to put an icon on the right-hand side, that's going to be in the actions. And you can see with the actions, it requires a list, so you can put more than one if you want. But let's say I want to put an icon button here. Then yep, you can see there it is. Sweet, so that's the basics of the app bar. Now just coming back to the body, I'm going to show you the next widget that is really important, and it's called a column. So I'll show you columns and rows, but just starting with a column, it requires a children of widgets. So let's just put in, say, 3 boxes here, and I'm going to make the first box just a container. Let's just have a height and width of 200 and make it deep purple. And then I'm just going to copy this exact same container, but maybe let's just make the colors a bit lighter. So if I save it, then there it is. Now let's actually go back to our scaffold and delete the background color so that we can see these better. Awesome. And let's also delete that app bar as well, since we're done looking at that for now. And let's just focus on this column. So columns are good widgets to display in a vertical fashion, and rows are going to do the same thing but for the horizontal. And this current column that we have here, we have our 3 boxes. So a couple of things about a column is you can control this main axis alignment. And just to show you the differences, right? If I show you the center, it's just going to be aligned to the middle. You can also go for the end. And a lot of the times space evenly comes in really handy, as well as space between. So a lot of different ways we can space out the UI. So that's main axis alignment. Now, the other one I want to illustrate is the cross-axis alignment. Now, to show this one, let's make our first box bigger and make the following boxes a little smaller. So if you save this, then we get this kind of 3 containers like this. And so we looked at the main axis alignment and how that changes the column. I also want to show you about the cross-axis alignment. So if you say start, then this will align everything to the left like this. And so we're looking at the other axis now. You can say end and it will align to that side, and center, of course. So using the cross axis and the main axis alignment, you can space these out however you like. Cool, so let's just bring them all back to the same size. Now you can see here in our containers, we very specifically gave them a height and a width, right? They are fixed to be a size of 200. Now let's say this last box here doesn't have a height, then it just disappears, obviously. But you can wrap this widget in another widget called an expanded widget. And this one is also super useful. And expanded widgets go well with columns and rows because what it does is it just expands the widget to fill up the rest of the space. So you can see that third box, if I save this, it just fills it up to fill the rest of the space. And so if I just get rid of these widths as well, and then I get rid of the heights for the first two containers, and let's just put them all in expanded widgets. Let's see what happens. Now, this is why I like expanded widgets a lot, because instead of manually setting a specific size, if I say like 3 expanded widgets, then it's going to divide the screen evenly into thirds. So it's going to be very proportioned out. And so one thing you can have a look at is this flex property. And if you hover over it, it's initially just a value of 1. And what the flex property tells us about is pretty much the ratio of this current widget in comparison to the other ones. So for example, right, if I say flex is 2, then that widget is going to be twice as big as the other. And if I say 3, it'll be 3 times as big as the other. So you can kind of have good ratios going on. Cool, so that's an expanded widget. Like I said, it goes hand in hand with columns and rows. So now let me show you one problem when you're using columns and rows. So let's say our first box has a height of 350. In fact, let's say all of these boxes have a height of 350, which is quite large. And if you save them, you can see it's not going to fit all on the screen, right? Like the bottom square doesn't fit. So you get this sort of overflow problem. And so now the next widget I want to introduce to you is called a list view. So if you just change that column to a list view and you save it, we're no longer going to get this problem, because what a list view does is pretty much the same as a column, but it can scroll. So now we have a scrollable list, which means all of our children should fit. And you can also control here the scroll direction. So it's going to be vertical by default, but let's say I want to make it horizontal. And let's give these guys some widths. Then you can have a horizontal list view as well. I didn't show you the row explicitly, but it's going to be the same as a column. But columns are vertical and rows are horizontal. So columns and rows are for vertical and horizontal UI layouts, and list views are used for when you want them to scroll. Now you can see the way we created this list view. We specified the children for the list view, right? You can also create them on demand by using a LISTVIEW.builder. And this one will be really helpful as well. So in the item builder, you can create a list tile, which is another default widget. And we can specify the item count. So how many do we want to create? Well, let's say 10. And just to show you what's happening here, just for the title here, let's put in a text widget to display the index. So the index is going to be starting from 0, and we're going to go up until we have 10 items. So that's going to be 0 to 9. And you can see that index, if I print it, we have a vertical list like this. And so just to kind of connect this back to some of our previous concepts, let's say we have a list of names. So I got Mitch, Sharon, Vince. And let's say I just want to print these names in the list view. So if you look at the item count, again, instead of just manually specifying 10, you can say names.length. So this will just get the number of how long that list is. And then in the text, we can say names and just get the index. So we looked at lists earlier on in the course. So this is how we can display it now using a list view for the UI. So similar to list views, we also have grid views. So if I show you how to do a grid view, in the grid delegate, just to keep it simple, the one I always like to use is the sliver grid delegate with fixed cross-axis count, which is a mouthful, but all this means is, let's say I'm going to put 8. It's just how many you want in each row for the grid. So let me show you here. Let's say like a chessboard, right? A chessboard is an 8 by 8 grid. So let's say for the item count, I want to have 64. And the item builder, let's just create a container here. And it looks like everything's stuck together, so we can't really see it. So let's just put some margin padding on the container. There it is. So there's our grid. That's 8 by 8. And so, like I said before, this grid delegate is just saying how many you want in each row. So right now we have 8 in each row. We can say 4. And so that's what that number is controlling. Awesome. So that's a grid. Now let's move on to a stack. Now, stack also has children, and what it does is, just like the name suggests, it stacks different widgets on top of each other. So let's illustrate this. So I'm going to have 3 different boxes. Let's have a big, medium, and then a small box. And so by default, you can see it's just all aligning to the top left corner. And stack has alignment properties just like columns and rows. So you could say, give me the center alignment. You can do bottom right and just anything you want. Awesome. Now the very last widget I want to show you for this particular section is a gesture detector. So let's just delete all this, and in the body, let's just go back to our very basic container. And maybe let's just give it a child, and let's just say like tap me, and let's put it in the middle, right? So everything in Flutter is a widget, which is really cool because you can just go to any of these widgets and you can wrap it with something called a gesture detector. And what that does is it just detects gestures from the user. And a very common gesture is the on tap. But you can see here there's all sorts of other ones like long press, double tap, things like that. And so if you specify this on tap method, this will do something when the user taps on this particular widget. Which means anything on this screen, you can wrap it in a gesture detector, and so the user can tap on whatever you would like to be tapped. So I really love this widget. And so just to show you with our sort of console, just to show you that this actually works, you can see if I tap on this box, it'll just print it out, user tapped. And so now we can just start creating different methods and functions for this gesture detector. So just to show you in a bit more practical way, you can fill out the on-tap method just right there in the widget tree, but you can also separate out the function, which is probably a good idea. And so when we call this on-tap, then just go straight to this method. Awesome, so I hope some gears are turning and some dots are getting connected in your brain, but comment below and let me know if you have any issues with anything. I'll try to come and help around. But those are the most fundamental basic widgets that you need to know in Flutter. So now in the next section, let's look at some more practical ways to create some real functioning apps. Sweet, so now that we went over some of the fundamental widgets, now I'm going to show you a couple of widgets that have to do with navigation. So let's delete all this, and I'm going to create a folder called Pages. Oh, what's going on with this testing? Oh, let's just add this little const tag. Now in these pages, let's create first page. And let's just have it as a stateless widget with a blank scaffold. And let's create another page called the second page. Now when you come back to our main.dart file, in the home, this is where we created our scaffolds before, right? So now what we can do is just go directly to our first page. And it says auto import, so hit enter. And so now if you just restart the app, it'll just go straight to this first page. So just so that we know which page we're on, let's just create an app bar real quick and just say it in the title. And what we're going to do is in the body, in the middle, we're going to use a button. And when we click this button, let's try to navigate to the second page. So we have to specify the on pressed. And so when the user presses this button, let's try to navigate to this second page. So let me show you how to do that. We're going to use something called a navigator, and we're going to push to the second page. So if I just save this and I rerun it and I click on the button, then yep, it brings us to the second page, which also is a blank scaffold. So just so we know what we're looking at, let's create an app bar real quick. Sweet, and you can see automatically in the app bar, it's already got that back button. So this is why Flutter is really useful and easy to work with. And this is the basics of navigation. Now, a couple of things I want to show you is another way to sort of handle navigation, especially when you have a lot of different pages, is to use some routes. So in the material app, you can specify a few different routes. So for example, the first one, let's just call second page and give it the second page. And so once we have a route, what we can do is instead of this bit of code, we can just say navigator. And before we did push, but now we can say push named, and then we can just give the route name here. And so this one just makes it look a little nicer and easier to deal with. And of course, you can just add as many routes here as necessary. Awesome, so that's the basics of how to navigate to a different page. Now, what I want to show you is a very common way to handle navigation is to have a drawer. So if I just delete everything, and if you have an app bar and you also have a drawer, without even specifying anything here, you can see that there's already that menu icon on the top left. And if you click on it, it'll open up a blank drawer. So what we can do now is inside this drawer, we can start decorating things. So for example, like the background color. And the child, it's common to use just a big column here. And also for the very top, there's already a default widget that's really useful for this situation, which is called a drawer header. And all this does is, like, if I give it an icon, it just takes up a good chunk of space at the top. So this is where you would usually have your logo. And kind of similar to what we did before, let's just ignore these const tags for this for now. Yeah, we don't need to worry about that. Cool, so below this logo, we can now have a few list tiles. So say one for home page, one for like a settings page. And so what we can put in here, now we can create a container with rows and columns and text widgets to create a nice looking tile. But because it's such a common use case, Flutter already has some nice tiles to use. So for example, we can use a list tile and then give it an icon and give it a text. And let's just copy this and do one for the settings as well. Cool. Now, if you look in the list tile, it's got that on tap. And so if we press this, then let's go to the home page. And so currently we've got first page and second page. So let's just delete that second page. And I'm just going to start creating some new pages here. So I'm just going to call it home page and then a settings page. So it's just going to be very similar to what we had before. Cool, and coming back to our main.dart file, let's get rid of this route and call it home page, and maybe another one for settings page. Awesome, so coming back to our drawer here, if I click on this home, I want to go to the home page. Right, so then now we can just use that navigator.push that we looked at before. And same thing for the settings page. Sweet. And again, just to come back to our other pages, let's just create a quick app bar so that we know what we're looking at. So if I just restart this, so I'm in my first page, go to our drawer, and then we can click on the home page and navigate around. Cool. Now one thing, I don't know if you noticed, but when I open up this drawer and I go to the home page, when I click back, it still shows the drawer. And if you look at most of the apps that we use today, that drawer should be closed when I go back. So what you're going to do is, first of all, we're going to pop the drawer. So navigator.pop, this will just exit whatever we're looking at currently. So we're going to pop the drawer first and then we'll go to the home page. So if you just save this and restart it, what's going to happen is, let's open up the drawer, go to the home page, but then if I go back, the drawer is closed. And that's kind of the behavior that we want for most of our apps. Cool, so that's how you use a drawer, which is going to be very helpful to navigate around to different pages in your app. Now, another common way to do it is to use a bottom navigation bar. So this is also something that you see a lot in many apps, right? It's that bar on the bottom. So if you look at the bottom navigation bar, we can specify some items. And I'm going to have just say 3 things here. So the home, the profile, and the settings. And then so you can look at this and say bottom navigation bar item. And just give it the icon and the name. Sweet, and if you save this, you can see there it is on the bottom. Now decoration, of course, we can make this look prettier by changing up the colors and things like that. But the main thing I want to show you here is how to navigate around. So if you click on it, nothing's going to happen. Okay, cool. Now if you come back to our home page, I actually want to get rid of this app bar now. And I just want to show that it's our home page through the body. Because on our original page, we're already going to have an app bar. So I'll show you what I mean. Let's do the same thing for the settings page. And we're going to need one more page for the profile. Okay, awesome. So just coming back to our very first page, right? Let's create a list of pages. So we've got that home page, we've got the profile page, and the settings page. And then in the scaffold, if you go to the body, let's display the page of whatever we're looking at right now. So at the beginning of the course, we looked at how lists work. So if I say like, give me the 0th index for the page, that's going to be the home page, as you can see. If you go 1, that'll be the profile page, as you can see. And then finally, number 2 is going to be the settings page. So we're going to need an integer to sort of track which page we're looking at, right? So I'm going to create an integer called selected index. And let's just start off at 0, which is the home page. And then we've got these list of pages. And so now if you come back to the body, we can just say, show me the page of whatever the current selected index is. So it's going to start at 0. And then now finally, we just need a method to update the selected index. So navigate bottom bar, what we need as a parameter is an integer for the index, the new index that we're going to. So when this method is called, let's just set the state and just update our selected index to that new index here. Awesome. Now I just realized for us to use set state, we need this to be a stateful widget, right? Because we need the screen to update, but we actually made this as a stateless widget from the beginning. So if you're ever in the situation where you need to switch between stateless widgets and stateful widgets, you can just click and hover over the word stateless widget. And on Mac, if you press Command dot, you can see there's a convert to stateful widget. And so there's going to be a similar command for Windows as well. But you can convert this to a stateful widget. And the reason why I need to do this is because I just wanted to set the state and update the index. So now that we've got this nice method, if you go back to that bottom navigation bar, it says current index. Yeah, we can give it our selected index, and also there's going to be an on tap. And so if we tap anything on the bottom, then let's navigate the bottom bar. So we're going to call that method. Awesome. And so if you just save this and you click around, then we can navigate between the 3 different pages. Cool. So then you can just go to these individual pages and decorate whatever you need to do. Sweet. So that's how we handle navigation in Flutter. Now we've opened up another brand new Flutter project, and every time you open up a new project, you always get this demo counter app, and it's worth having a look at individual bits and pieces of this code. But just to show you, I think it's a good idea to show you how to do this from scratch. So I'm just going to delete everything below the main function, and let's try to code up this demo counter app ourselves. So first of all, we're going to need to create my app. And as we discussed earlier, everything's going to start off from this material app. And for the home, let's just create a counter page. Now, when we create pages, it's a good idea to create them in a separate folder, just so that everything's organized. And so this counter page is going to be a stateful widget. So far we've been looking at stateless widgets, but now it's time to look at stateful widgets. So for now, let's just put in a blank scaffold, and let's come back to our main.dart file because we can now import what we just created. Cool. Now when we create an app on a very kind of high level, we need three things. We need a variable, we need a method, and we also need the UI, which is the kind of visual user interface that the user is going to interact with. So for our counter app, our variable is going to be an integer. And let's start it at 0. And we're going to create a method to increment the counter. So anytime that we call this method, then we want to get the counter and just ++, which means to increase by 1. Now, anytime that we change the value of something and we want it to be reflected in the app, we have to make sure to put it inside a set state. So set state is used for stateful widgets, and essentially what it does is it just rebuilds the widget. And so if you don't do this set state, then even though the counter value has incremented, it's not going to be reflected on the screen if we don't set the state and rebuild the widget. So that's the difference between stateless widgets and stateful widgets. Stateless widgets are widgets that don't change ever, whereas stateful widgets change depending on the state, right? So if any kind of new value has been updated and you want to change and you want to show the change on the screen, then that's for stateful widgets. And we can use set state to rebuild it. So let's see this in action. Now I'm going to create a very basic counter app here. So let's have a column. And let's just have some text saying you push the button this many times. Now it looks like it's at the very top, so I'm just going to access alignment to the middle. And let's just center everything. So we've got our message, and now let's show the actual counter value. So in a text widget, if you just show the counter, you can see it's a red squiggle because it's an integer. And to show it as a text, we have to convert it to a string. Cool, so there it is, just 0. Now it looks like it's quite tiny, so let's just change up the style for this text and make it much bigger. Awesome, and then the final thing we need is a button of some sorts. So one of the default widgets that Flutter has is called an elevated button. So when the user presses the button, let's just call that increment counter method. And let's see what this button looks like. Cool, there it is. Now if you click on the increment button, you can see it'll increase. And so if I just show you real quick, if I was to say, let's increment the counter, but you don't include the set state part of it, then it's not going to change. Now, the actual value of the counter in the code is increasing, but it's just not rebuilding the widget. So we can't see the fact that it changed. So that's what set state does. Okay, it rebuilds the widget to reflect the change. Awesome. Now, if you're a complete beginner, learning and understanding how a very basic app like this counter app and how it works, it actually goes through some really important ideas. So I really recommend playing around with this and seeing what you can do. You can create calculators. I think that's a very good app to try to make as a challenge for yourself. Because if you think about what we made for this counter app, we looked at variables. We have a method to change the value of the variable. And then now we know some basic widgets to create the UI for it. And now you understand the difference between stateless and stateful widgets to create a counter app like this. Now let's continue on with our learning. So I've created another Flutter project. So again, I'm just going to delete everything below the main function to start from scratch. And let's create my app and our material app. And what we're going to do here is we're going to create a to-do app. So let's create that in a separate page folder. And so the main idea I want to show you with this to-do app, first of all, is getting the user's input. So in our counter app, all that we get from the user's input is just the user pressing a button. So now let's collect some more information from the user. So in the body, in the middle, I want to introduce you to another very important widget, which is called a text field. So without any further customization, if you just save this, you can see that text field at the middle there. And so if you click on it, you can actually start typing in the text field right away. And now it begs the question, well, how do we actually access what the user typed? So to do that, we need a text editing controller. So I'm just going to call it my controller. And if you look at this text field, one of the options here you can see is controller. So we can give it our controller. And so this controller just stores and gives us access to whatever the user typed in there. Cool. Now let's wrap this in a column so that we can have some other widgets here as well. Below the text field, I want to create another button. And let's say if the user presses this button, let's have a method to greet the user. And we haven't created this method, so let's just do that real quick. Sweet, there it is. Now let's just make sure to center this alignment so that we can bring it back to the middle. And now if I type in, say, Mitch, and I hit tap, and you can see with our controller, we have access to the text that the user typed. Sweet. Now, if you look at the text field, there's a lot of things you can customize about it. So if you look at the decoration and you have an input decoration, we can specify a border. Now, there's a lot of styles you can go for, but one that I usually go for is an outline border. And it looks like everything's stuck to the sides. So I'm just going to wrap everything in a padding. There we go. And one important thing that you should be using is a hint text. So you can see here that this is just a string. So the hint text is sort of the grayed out text for what you want the user to type in. Like give them a hint about what should be typed in here. So for example, let's say type your name. Sweet. So now that we can actually get the user's input, and we can have access to it, let's actually spit back some information as well. So let's output something. So I want to have a greeting message. So let's just create that at the top. So I'm just going to have a string called greeting message, and let's just have a blank string at the beginning. And what we're going to do is when we greet the user, instead of just printing it to the console, let's try to print it on the app. So to do that, we're going to say greeting message is hello, and then let's just add on whatever the user typed in the controller. Right? And since we want this to actually be reflected in the app when the change happens, we have to set the state, which again just means to rebuild this widget. Okay, sweet. So at the top, you can see nothing. Now if I say type in your name and I hit tap, then it says hello Mitch. Cool, so I hope that made sense. Now the main important thing that we learned just then is about the text field and using the controller to access what the user typed in the text field. Now there are some coding practices that will help your code be more clean and easy to read. And so for example, one thing we can optimize here is it's probably a good idea to just create another string here called username and then just store what the controller has in this string. And then so now we can just say, instead of directly going to the controller, we can just say add the username. So this will just make it easier for us to read the code later on. Yo, what's up? Welcome back to another quick Flutter tutorial. In this one, I'm going to show you how we can create a functional to-do app using Flutter. So I'll show you how we can check off each task and also create new tasks, as well as using a little slidable widget to delete the task as well. And then finally, I'll show you using Hive how we can store the data in your local device. And it's actually really simple to do, so let me show you by jumping into the code. So I've opened up a brand new Flutter project, and just to keep everyone on the same page, in my main function, I'm running my app, which brings us to this home page. And in this home page, I've just got a blank scaffold. So if you run this, you should just have a blank white app. And so this is where we'll begin. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is for the background color, let's make it a bit of a, say, yellow theme. So let's go with yellow 200. And then let's create an app bar, which if we save is going to be blue. And so instead of specifying the color individually in the app bar, let's actually just go back to the main.dart file and use this theme. So this will probably be a good idea, especially if you have multiple pages. So the primary swatch color, you can pick whatever theme you want to go for, but I'm just going to go with a yellow color. Okay, so that will automatically change the app bar as well as the floating action bar, which we'll use later. The default colors are going to be whatever we specified here. So that's good. And let's give the app bar a title. And I'm just going to say to do. And one other thing I like to do in the app bar is you can see there's a bit of a shadow there, which personally I'm not a big fan of. So the elevation, let's make it 0. I kind of like this flat aesthetic to it. Cool, now next thing is in the body, we want to have a list view of tiles. So we want to have a few to-do tasks in a list. And so let's say just for now, just to keep it simple, in the children, I'm going to have something called a to-do list, which we haven't created yet. So with this one, let's create it in a separate folder. So in my library, you can see I've got the main function and I've got a pages folder, which currently we just have one page. And I want to create a new folder called utilities. So I'm just going to call it util. Sometimes I call it components. But essentially in here, let's create our to-do list, or sorry, to-do tile. Okay, then we can import my material.dart and create a stateless widget called to-do tile. So before we create this tile, let's just go back to the home page and you should be able to, oh, I called it to-do list. I want to call it to-do tile. You should be able to import what we just created. There it is. And if we come back to our to-do tile, we can encapsulate the code inside this folder. Okay, so this will keep our code nice and clean in the home page. So let's start with a child, just saying some tasks. So let's say make tutorial, which is what I'm doing right now. Here it is, but let's give it some decoration. And let's give it a color. And let's just go for a yellow color. Cool, so there it is. Now I'm just gonna put some padding around this container. Okay, so you can see now there's a bit of padding there, but maybe we could go for like 25. And then let's put some padding not outside the container, but within the container for the child. So let's say maybe 12. That's looking pretty good so far. Maybe 24. Yeah, I actually like that better. Cool, and you can see that the corners are very sharp, and you'll know I don't like sharp corners. So let's go to the border radius here, and let's make this 12. Okay, looking pretty good so far. Now, how about we include a checkbox next to this so that we can tick off a task, which means in the child of this container, we're gonna have to wrap this in a row. Okay, so I'm just gonna say, put some comment here. I'm gonna say task name, and then let's put in a checkbox. So if you just start typing checkbox, you should see this default widget in Flutter. So you can see when we create a checkbox, we need to give it two properties. So the value and the onChanged. So the value being a boolean, so it's going to be a true or false value, like I did this task or I didn't do it. And then the onChanged allows us to switch between the two. So if we think about the to-do tile, right, and if I just kind of comment this checkbox out for a second, coming back to our home page, what I really want to do is I want to create multiple to-do tiles, right? And if you think about what changes between each tile, like what varies between each tile, it's going to be the task name and the value of each task, like if I've done it or not. And also we need it to create a method for when the user taps on a particular checkbox. So there's essentially three things that's going to vary between tile to tile. Okay, so that's what I'm going to create up here. So I'm going to say final string. The first thing is the task name. And then we also need to know the boolean. So task completed, right? This would be a true or false. And then the last thing is I need to have a method. So I'm going to have a function, and this is going to be a boolean, and we're going to call it onChanged because that's what this is called. So if you're not sure about what this stuff is, if you just hover over the onChanged, I'm just copying the type of method that they require. Okay, so these three things, let's create the constructor for these. So the first thing is the task name, and then we need to know if the task is completed, and then also we need to know what's the onChanged function. So let's get rid of this const tag, and now we can say, instead of just fixing it to be make tutorial, you can see it's going to replicate for each tile. Let's just say whatever the task name is. Same thing for the value. We now should be able to know what the task completed is, and the onChanged method we're going to give to the onChanged method. Cool, so what did we just do? If you come back to the home page, you can see that our to-do tile is a red squiggle because we have to fill these things out, right? So let's say the first task name, let's call it make tutorial, and then task completed, let's say true, and then onChanged. Now onChanged, we're going to create this method in just a second. So I'm just gonna say do nothing right now. Okay, so if I save this, you can see here it is. So we have make tutorial. Now if I copy this and I create another one, I could say do exercise, and let's say this is false. Okay, so this is how we create different to-do tiles. Now one thing is this checkbox isn't clickable because, well, we fixed these values to be true and false, and we didn't specify the onChanged method. So let's do that now. Now let's create this onChanged method in just a second. And just before we do, instead of using a list view that has children and we have to specify like what the widgets are inside, let's make this a little bit more dynamic. And so what I mean is later I want to be able to have a plus button here so I can create new tiles and also delete new tiles. So it's not ever going to be whatever's inside the children. So I'm going to just get rid of this, and we're going to use a LISTVIEW.builder. Okay, I've made a separate tutorial on focusing on list view builders, so check that out if you need, but I can show you real quick how to use it. First of all, let's come up to the top here and let's create a list of to-do tasks. Okay, so I'm going to say list to-do list. Okay, and let's put in some default to-do lists. And the way I want to structure this data is, first of all, let's have the task name. So I'm going to say make tutorial. And then the second part of this list is going to be a boolean to denote if it's been done or not. So let's say at the beginning it should be false because we haven't done it. And maybe let's create another one here and say do exercise, and this is also false. So the reason why we created this separate list is because now we can just use this list view builder and we can do some cool things. So say item count, we have to specify how many we want to build. So this one is going to be just the to-do list length, so however many we have inside. And now we can create the item builder. Let's grab this. And we're going to return a to-do tile, which is what we created earlier, right? And so now we can specify here. So the task name. So this is going to be to-do list. And we want whatever index we're looking at. So this index will go from 0, like 0, 1, 2, 3, for however many items we have. So for a particular index, let's get the 0th one. So that's going to be this. And then for the task completed, it will be the same thing, but number 1. So this is number 0, and then this is number 1. And for the onChanged, we haven't specified this yet. So let's say, let's create that now actually. And I don't know why it's called P0, this boolean. I'm just going to change this to be value. Okay, and let's call this checkbox changed. Okay, so let's create our method. So let's create our method here. So this is just for the checkbox was tapped. Okay, so let's create a void checkbox changed. And so if the user taps on the tile, then the value we can give to the checkbox changed. So let's actually accept this value. So I'm going to say boolean value. And also let's get the index. So which to-do task are we talking about, right? So that's controlled by this index. So now I can give it a value and I can give it in the index. I should put a question mark here, some null safety. Cool, so if I tap on this, I want to be able to check this on and off, right? So let's set the state, and what we're going to change is this value here, or these values. So to-do list, which index are we looking at? Are we looking at this one, or are we looking at this one? And if you take number 1, so that's going to be these guys. Let's set it to be just the opposite of what we currently have. So I think this should work. So let's just refresh this. So if I check this off and on, you can see now we can tick this on and off. Cool. If you have any questions about what we just did, just ask below and I'll try to help out. Now, one thing about this, let's just go back to the to-do tile and just kind of clean up this decoration. I think that having a padding all the way around, the 25 all the way around, is not bad, but you can see it creates this kind of double 25. There's like 50 here. So I am a bit of a aesthetic creep, so I want to change this from all to only and just put it on every side. except for the bottom side. So what that does is it just creates a nice uniform padding around all of these widgets. So that's good. Now the other thing is I want to change this checkbox active color. It's yellow, which is in theme with what we want to do, but let's make this a bit darker. So let's go to this checkbox and let's say and in the checkbox we should be able to see the active color, and let's actually go for black, to be honest. Yeah, that looks much better. And one other touch I want to do is, you know this text widget, right? I want to have a strike through. Like if I did do the task, we can show it with this checkbox, but let's also cross off this text. So if you look at the style, in the text style, the decoration, we can go for text decoration, line through. There you are. Cool. So right now I actually made it to be always a line through, but we want to kind of follow whatever this checkbox is doing, right? Which is good because we have this task completed boolean. So we can say, all right, in the decoration, depending on if the task is completed, if it's completed, let's put a line through it. If not, let's just copy this. And we should just be able to see a none option. Okay, so this boolean will control this for us. So let's check this out. Cool, if I check this, then it's a line through it. And if we uncheck it, then it's back to normal. Cool, so we want to kind of put a line through it to get that dopamine hit as we do these tasks, you know? Okay, cool. So in terms of our to-do app, it's looking pretty good so far, except for the fact that we can't add or delete a new task, right? So that's going to be the crucial bit of functionality we need. So let's focus on that one. So first of all, let's create a floating action button. So if I go below the app bar, you can start typing floating action button. And the widget is also called floating action button. And we have to specify on pressed. If I save it, there it is. Let's give it a child. So I want to have a plus button, maybe an add button. Yep, here it is. And so if I click on this, if I unpress it, what do you want to do? I want to create new task. So this method, let's come up here, create a new task. So void create new task. Now what I want to happen when I create a new task is I want to show a dialog box so that the user can input the name of the task. Okay, so we can say show dialog. And this is where we return an alert dialog. And so if I just save this, yep, there's nothing there because we didn't create it. Now, usually we can create it inside here, but again, just to keep our code nice and clean, let's create this in a separate folder. So this is where the util comes in handy. So in the utilities, let's say dialog box. I'm going to call it dialog box. And so we're going to return an alert dialog. And now we can come back here and we can say dialog box and press tab to auto import it. Okay, so this dialog box we're going to create in this file here. So let's have a look at what we're going to do. So in the content, let's create a container, maybe height of 200. And the alert dialog, let's give it a background color of yellow. So let's just restart this. And if I click this, cool, here it is. This is our little box that we want to have a text field now. So let's create a column and I'm going to create a text field. So get user input, and then also below that I want to have some buttons, like a save button and also a cancel button. Okay, so if I just save this, right now we just have a text field in there, so we can just type stuff in. Cool, so the text field, it's fine the way it is, but I like to have a border around it. So let's say in the decoration, input decoration, and you can see in the border, I want to have a outline input border, which if you save, yep, I like this style, just having a border around it as opposed to just a line. Cool, and we can give it a hint text, or maybe that's inside the decoration. And this should be a string, yep. So let's say add a new task. Here it is, and then if you click on it, then you can start typing. And this yellow, actually, let's make this a little lighter. Cool. Okay, looking good. Now, below that, we're going to have a row of buttons. Okay, so I want 2 buttons, a save button, and then a cancel button. So these buttons, let's actually create another separate file so that we can reuse this button widget. I'm just going to call it my button. Cool, and when we think about creating this button, what are the 2 things that we need? We need to know the button's name, right? And we also want to know the onPressed. And so for this one, I'm going to use a void callback, which is it's a gesture detector, like it's a method, but it's going to return nothing. Okay, so remember in the other one we returned a boolean. This one is just going to be a void, and let's call it onPressed. And let's create these constructors. And the button itself, we can actually use a material button here. And so the onPressed is going to be whatever we create in the other page. And the child is going to be a text widget, because this is just a widget. And let's just give it the text. Cool, and the color of it, let's use the theme. So theme of context, color, primary color. Okay, so now that we created a little button, let's come back to our dialog box. Let's say my button, and so here it is. Let's press tab to auto import it. And the text, the first one, I want it to be a save button. And on the onPressed, let's just execute nothing for now. And let's create another one down here saying cancel. Cool, so here's our 2 buttons. Now I actually want to have it more on the right hand side. I want to have it like on the end. And also this column, let's space evenly. Cool, and actually we want to have a bit of a gap here. So I'm going to put in a constant sized box, width of just 4, I guess. Yeah, I just want a bit of a gap there, maybe 8. Now when the user types some stuff in here, how do we access this bit of text? Well, let's go to our text field, and you can see that there is a controller. So we can give it a controller. Now I want to be able to access this controller in my home page, so I'm just going to create the controller as a constructor. So when you create this text field, you need to give it a controller. And we can give this controller to this guy. And so what we did is, if you come back to the home page, you can see that the dialog box has a red squiggle because we have to give it a controller. So I'm going to create my text controller. So I'm just going to say controller is text editing controller, and give this controller to this guy. Cool, so this would give us access to whatever we type in here. Now we need to create the method for save and cancel. Okay, so coming back to our dialog box, right now, if I press save and I press cancel, it executes nothing. So let's create the methods here, right? So let's say void callback on save, void callback on cancel, require this on save, require this cancel, my boy. Let's get rid of this constant tag. And this method, let's pass through to this guy. Cancel method, give to this button. So again, what did we just do? We now, coming back to our home page, our dialog box has a red squiggle because we need to create these two methods. So on save, let's say just save new task, which we haven't created. And on the cancel, we could create a new method, but this one is just going to execute one line of code. So I'm just going to say navigator.of pop. And what that does is it just dismisses this dialog box. For this one, we'll create a new method though. Now when we click save, so let's say code, and when I click save, I want to do a couple things. If I just set the state, I want to add whatever's in here into this list. Okay, so let's say to-do list.add, and we're going to add a list because the first thing is going to be the controller and the text in the controller. So remember, the controller is what we can use to access this bit of text. Cool, and if you're going to add a new task, then obviously you haven't completed the task, right? So let's just say it's false for the boolean. Cool, and let's see how this looks. So if I say add a new task, let's say code a new app, and I hit save, you can see actually behind it, if you look carefully, it created the new task, but I want to dismiss this damn box. So let's say navigator.of context and just pop it. Okay, so let's just restart this again. Code new app, hit save, dismisses the dialog, and we just added a new task to this list. Cool, and actually one last thing is if I click this button again, it still says code new app, which we want to clear. So go to the controller and just clear it. Okay, sweet. So now we can add new tasks, right? Like let's just add this, and let's say code app, and we can keep adding this stuff. Now let's actually have a way to remove a task. So obviously we can check off the checkbox and say we did it, but maybe we want to be able to just delete it entirely. So this one, what we're going to do is if I go back to my to-do tile, I know a perfect widget for this. If you go to your pubspec.yaml, let's just include one dependency because this will make our app feel nice and good. Under the Cupertino icons, it's called Flutter Slidable. And we're going to go with version number, let's go with 1.2.0. So again, I made a separate tutorial covering just this slidable widget. So check that out if you need, I'll link it below. But I can show you here real quick what we need to do. So save this pubspec YAML and close it. And now go to the container of our to-do tile. So that's just this tile here. And we're going to wrap this container in a widget called slidable. There it is. So what this does is you can actually specify this end action pane. There's a start action pane and an end action pane. So that just means, are you dragging from the left or are you dragging from the right? So I want to drag from the right, the end. And here we're going to give it an action pane. And if you're ever curious, just hover over this to see what it requires. You can see motion, and I need to give it children, right? For the motion, if you look at the actual package, there's a few different animations I guess you could go for. And the one I want to go for is just a stretch motion. And then the children. So in the children, so if you slide, you can have multiple options, but I just want to have one option. So slidable action. And then the point of this slidable action is to delete this task. So I'm going to say a delete function is what we need to do. And we need to give it an icon.
Let's go with that bin. And also maybe a background color. Let's go with like a red. Cool, so if I come up here, every time we create a to-do tile, we need to give it a task name, a boolean of if the task is completed or not, and this onChanged just to check this on and off, right? Now let's create one more function, which if you hover over the on pressed, it wants this type of function. So function build context, and I called it a delete function. Okay, so let's make sure to require that as well. And so if I come back to my home page now, we should have a red squiggle somewhere on this to-do tile. So the delete function. What should happen if we delete it? I don't know why it's called PO, but I'm just going to change the name of it to be context. And let's create a new task called delete task, which we haven't created. So we have a create new task. Let's also have a delete task. So void delete task. And we actually want to know which task we're looking at. So let's require an index, right? So is it 0, 1, 2, or 3? Let's give it the index. And the way to delete a task is basically to just remove it from this list, right? So let's say set the state and to-do list dot remove, and I want to go for remove at, because this is going to require an index, which we already gave it. So let's check this out. Let's restart this motherfucker. Okay, so we've got these two things, and actually let's check this. Hey, there it is. So you can, this is what the slidable widget does. Again, it's super sharp, and I hate sharpness. Let's come back to the slidable action, and it's already got a border radius property, my man. All right. That's what I'm talking about. Cool, so these were the default tasks that we always going to have when we open up the app, right? But now we can just delete it. And we can have no tasks at all, which is good. This will be a nice functional standalone app. Cool, so our app looks like it's working pretty well. But one thing you'll realize is, let's say I add a new task here. And so I've got 3 tasks, but if I close this app completely and open it again, it's just going to come to the default. So it doesn't have any memory. So that's why we're going to use the Hive local database so that we can store some of this information on the phone. So I've made a separate tutorial on Hive itself, so check that out. I'll link it below. But I can show you real quick how we can use this in our to-do app. So the first thing is to go to your pubspec.yaml and let's add the dependencies in. So you've got to add these 2 dependencies. There's this Hive and also the Hive Flutter. And we actually also need to add it under these dev dependencies. So again, check out my Hive tutorial for more detail. This is just straight from the documentation. And we have to do a little bit of setting up. So if you go to your main function, let's initialize the Hive. So let's start typing Hive. And if you click, let's import the library we just put in our pubspec YAML. And you should be able to see this init Flutter. Cool, and we actually also need to make this function asynchronous, and we can await this. So that's how we initialize Flutter, and we also need to open the box, or I guess open a box. So we can say like var box await Hive open box, and here we can create a new box. So we can call it whatever you want. Let's just say my box. And so if you come to our home page, if you ever need to reference this box, you can say we can store it in a variable. So like final my box is Hive, and then we can open the box. So let's make sure to import Hive here as well. Cool. Now while we're doing some database work, let's actually create a new file. Create a new folder here called just data, and let's create a new file called database.dart. And in this, I'm going to create a new class. So to do database. Okay, so let's separate our homepage UI from the database related stuff. Okay, so let's reference the box as we did earlier. And we're going to need to import Hive here as well. Let's open the box, which we created my box. When it comes to this to-do list, so this make tutorial and do exercise is the default tasks that we can have when the user first opens the app in the history of the app, like the very first time. So this is going to be the default information, right? So I'm actually going to say, let's say like list to-do list. And let's just start with an empty list here. And without doing any more customization, I actually want to now delete this list. But all of our other code requires us to work with our list, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say to-do database, and I'm going to create an instantiation of our database. So to-do database, I'm just going to call it DB for database. And we can create an instance of this class. Okay, so we're going to have this to-do list that we can access. So all of these red squiggles of the to-do list we had before, you can just put DB and a dot in front of it. Okay, so this is the sort of overall to-do list we can use. Okay, now we need three methods here. So the first one is create initial data. So this is going to be used if run this method if this is the first time opening this app. First time ever opening this app. Okay, and if this is the first time opening this app, let's just say to-do list is, and let's put our default tasks. So make tutorial and it's false. Do exercise and it's also false. So if this is the first time the user has ever opened up the app, then let's just show these default tasks, just to give the user idea on what this app is actually doing. Now the other method is we need to load the data from the database, right? So void load data. And just before we fill this out, we also need to update the database. Okay, so if the user makes any changes, we also want to update it in our Hive database. Okay, so if this is the first time running the app, then the to-do list is going to be these two tasks. Now, anytime after the first time the user opens it, it would mean that we already have some information in our database, right? So let's say to-do list equals to my box.get. Oh, actually, I made a little mistake. The Hive open box, we just need to say box when we reference it. Yeah, we don't need to open the box. So in the main file, we'll open the box, and then in our code, if I want to reference the box, we can just say hive.box. So now we can say in our load data, to-do list is equal to my box, and let's get the to-do list. So the way Hive works, like I said, I'm going to link my separate tutorial for Hive below, but the way it works is it's like a key value pair. And so we can call the key to-do list, and then it will return our to-do list. And same thing with the updating the database. Like if I make any changes, if I check these off, then that means our to-do list would have changed. And so I want to update the database. So let's say my box.put, and then for this key, I'm going to put in the to-do list. Okay, so it goes two ways. We can update the database and then we can also get the data from our database. Okay, so how does this actually work? So now that we've set up these three basic methods, if we come back to the home page, what we really need to do is to look at the init state. So the initial state. So when the app first runs, we have to do a couple checks. Okay, so I want to say if this is the first time ever opening the app, then create default data. Right, so how do we do this check? Well, let's just reference the box and we're going to check in my box and let's get this key value. Now, if this is null, right, if there's nothing in there under the to-do list, then that means we've never stored any information. So this is the first time ever opening the app. So if that's the case, then let's just go to the database and create initial data, which will execute this and give us some default data. And then else there already exists data. So this is not the first time that the user has opened the app. Then I can say database and just load the data. Okay, and this will execute this function and it'll go to the my box, and if there's something in the to-do list, then let's put it in our list here. Cool, and then finally we have to update the database. So this is kind of going from our app session data to giving it to our Hive database. And so I actually want to execute this anytime the user makes a change. So anytime, like if the checkbox happens or they add a new task, anytime the user makes an interaction, then let's update the database. Okay, so the checkbox was changed, then let's update the database. Save a new task, update the database, and create new task, we're good. If we delete, then update the database. Awesome, so this should work. So I'm going to, let's restart this. Cool, so this is the first time opening the app. So let's just say I'm going to check these off and let's see if it remembers. Hey, and there it is. So it stores the memory. So if I have a new task, and I create it here and I kill this app and I open it again, it's still in the memory. So this is how we use some local database storage to make our app more functional.
Hey, what's up? Welcome back to another quick Flutter tutorial. In this one, I'm going to show you how to code an e-commerce app like this sneaker shop I coded up, where the user can browse through the shoes for sale and add them to the cart. The user can also, of course, remove items from the cart. So let me show you how to do this by jumping into the code. So I've opened up a brand new Flutter project and you should just get this demo Flutter app. So what I'm going to do is, the first thing is to prepare some images we might need. So I've got that in this folder and I've got 4 different shoes and also a Nike logo. So I just got this off the internet, so make sure to just prepare some images and go to your project library and let's drag this image folder in. So let's come back to our project and tell the pubspec YAML. If you scroll down, you can see the assets. So just comment this out and tell it to import some images in. Cool, so now everything below the main function, I'm just going to delete and let's create this from scratch. So let's create our material app, and for the home page, the first thing I want to display is actually the intro page. So let's create a new folder called pages and create intro page. And so this will just be that nice greeting message at the beginning. So let's make sure to import this. Cool. Now for the background color, I'm going to go for a bit of a light gray. as opposed to a completely white background. And in the body of the column, we're going to have the logo at the top, and let's just have a bit of information like some text on the bottom and a button so that the user can enter the app. So starting with the logo, this is just going to be our image. So this one right here. Now we can control the height of this image. And also let's make sure to center the column. Cool. And maybe we could add some padding around this as well. Sweet. Now let's use some sized boxes. So this will just be some empty space. And below that, let's have a title. So let's say, just do it. Now this one I want to make a little bit bolder and bigger and create some more space. And for the subtitle, let's say something else like brand new sneakers and custom kicks made with premium quality. And this doesn't have to be bold. It can be a bit smaller, and maybe let's make it gray. Cool. And also let's center this alignment. And I'm just going to add some padding on the sides here. There we go. Cool. Now the last thing is the Start Now button. So this one I'm just going to create using containers. And let's say like Shop Now. And let's create a bit of a dark button. Now that means our text should be white. And let's of course curve the corners here. Cool, now this is looking really good. Now let's just go to this container and wrap it in a gesture detector. And if the user taps this button, then let's navigate to a new page. So we're gonna go to home page, which we haven't created yet. Now for this column, I'm going to space this out. Now I'm just going to comment this out for a second, and if I save this, you can see it's spaced out nicely. So now let's create our home page. And import it. Cool, so now we should have a blank app inside. So far so good. So now in the scaffold, the first thing I'm going to do is to create the bottom navigation bar. So I'm actually going to import a Google nav bar. And I've made separate tutorials for this one, so check that out if you need. But I think this one looks pretty modern. So I'm going to create this in a separate folder called components. So let's call it my bottom nav bar. And it's going to be the GNav. There it is. And so for the tabs, I'm going to have pretty much 2 tabs. So the first G button is going to be home or shop, let's call it. And the other one is going to be the cart. Okay, so now we can go to the bottom navigation bar here and import this. Sweet, so you can see there it is at the bottom. Now let's just decorate this up a little bit. So it's gray there for the unselected options, and if it's selected, then make the gray bit darker. Also, let's have a bit of a border here. And fill in the colors. Cool. Which reminds me, the background color of the homepage, let's make it the same light gray. Cool. Now one thing I like doing with this one is the main axis alignment to be in the center. I actually like this in the middle because we only have 2 options anyway. Cool. And let's just add some padding, and the border radius seems very round, so you can make this a little sharper if you like. Yeah, I like that kind of squared off look a little bit better. Sweet. Now the main thing here is really the on tab changed value. So this function, right? Let's just copy it to the top and require it. Right, so if you come back to the home page, we should have a red squiggle because we have to fill out this on tab change. So for this, I'm just going to change this to index. Now this is just basically for navigating the bottom bar. So let's try to create the stuff up here. Now the first thing is I need to have a integer to keep track of the selected index. Right, so starting at 0, let's have a method to update our selected index. Right, so 0 for the home and 1 for the cart. So with a given index, let's just update it using a quick set state. Cool, so now that we've got that taken care of, we need to have some pages that we can navigate between. Right, so the first thing is a shop page, which we haven't created. And the second one is the cart page, which we also haven't created. So let's do that now. So for now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create some text in the middle, just so I can see this working. Okay, so if I save this, and it looks like it's not showing, and that's because we have to give it to the body. So now if you give the pages to your body, you can see now we go from shop to cart. So everything is set up nicely. So now we can just fill out in the shop page file. Now just before we do that though, let's fill out one last sort of setting up, which is if I create an app bar here, for the leading, I want to have a drawer icon, so like a menu icon. There it is. If I press this, I want to open up the drawer. So the background color for this, I actually want it to be transparent, elevation also 0, so I basically don't want to see an app bar, but I do want to see that menu icon. So if you want to open up the drawer, you can say scaffold of context open drawer, and just create a blank drawer here. So let's try this out. So it looks like we have a bit of an error. And that's because we should wrap this button in a builder. Okay, sweet. So there it is. There's our drawer. So now we can start decorating this drawer. So this one I want to make a bit darker, and let's have a column of like the logo and some other pages we can go to. Cool, and if you didn't know, you can actually change the color of an image, which I'm gonna do. And let's create a quick divider here. So this one's just a line, that's all it is. Cool, and beneath this, we can now create other pages. So let's just create some list tiles here. And so we can have a home tab. Just create some padding, and everything is dark, so let's just make this white. And we can copy this and maybe create just a couple more. So this one is going to be highly dependent on your app, right? Like what pages you want your app to include. So I'll just show you how to sort of set this up, and then you can decide on what buttons you want here. So I'm just going to have these 3 buttons, so home, about, and logging out. Now I want the logging out at the very bottom, so I'm going to wrap everything on the top in another column. And then let's space out this entire overall column. Cool, so that way we can push the log out to the bottom. So let me know or comment below if you have any questions. I'm happy to come and explain this in more detail if you need. Okay, so now we can come back to the shop page and start filling this out. So again, let's have a bit of a plan. On the top of my column, I want a search bar, and then I want a bit of a kind of nice message, and then the hot picks, which is the list of shoes. So for the search bar, I'm not actually going to incorporate the functionality of a search bar here, but let's just include it anyway because we might need it later on. And building UIs with Flutter is just so fun. Make sure to curve these borders. Okay, so that's the search bar, and then underneath, I just want to have a little message here. I saw this at a Nike shop before. I thought it was pretty cool. I think it's like a Michael Jordan quote. But yeah, everyone flies, some fly longer than others. Just a nice, cute little message. Okay, finally, now for the main part of this entire app is this hot picks. So let's put in some text first. I'm going to put in a fire emoji and make this have the see all option as well on the side, and let's change up the style. Now for the see all, I think this one could be like blue. Yeah. Sweet. Now underneath these, we can now have a list of shoes. Cool, so I want to use an expanded list to fill up the rest of the space, and we're going to return a shoe tile, which I'm going to create now in my components. So basically a shoe tile, I just want like a kind of card to display the shoe and the price and all that stuff. So let's try that now. Now with a given shoe, we should be able to fill out the shoe tile. Now this is a good time for us to actually create the models. So let's go to our library and create a folder called models. And what models is basically, say the first one is going to be shoe.dart. So that's the main sort of product for our app. And so we can create a class for a shoe. And what do different shoes have? So the different shoes have a different name, different price, they have a different image, and also a different description. So let's create the constructors for this so that we can create it in other places. Cool, so now we can import this shoe tile. So with a given shoe, so let's create a container here, and let's just add some margin to the left hand side because I don't want to stuck on the left side of the screen. Cool, and for the child, I'm going to create a column, and for a bit of a plan, let's say I want to have a shoe picture and then the description underneath, and then the price below that, and also a button to add the cart. So let's start with the image of the shoe picture. That should just be with a given shoe, we can get the image path of that shoe. So let's actually come back to the shop page and pass through this shoe. Okay, so what I mean is we can create a new shoe here. Right, so in the LISTVIEW builder, when we go through the index, starting from 0 to however many shoes we have, we can go through the image file. So just as an example, we can create a shoe here and give this shoe to our shoe tile. So if I just save this, by the way, if it's not loading, forgot to do the item count here. So just say like 4. And the scroll direction, I actually want to change it from vertical to horizontal. And it looks like something on the top corners look a little weird. I think it might be because of the image. Let's wrap this image in a clip rect to curve the corners. Now for the description, just go shoe description, and this one can be kind of gray. Okay, now for the bottom part of the shoe tile, I'm going to create a row. And a column at the beginning, which contains the name and then the price below that. So let's just save this as we go along. Now you see that plus button? I want to go to the row and say space between to push it to the end. And then here, let's see, in the column, let's do the same thing. Now for the plus button, I want to wrap it in a container because I want to kind of give it some color. So in the decoration, let's say black, which means my plus button should be white. And I want to sort of use a border radius, but only for the top left and bottom right. Yep, that's the kind of look I want to go for. And now looking at the left hand side, let's align this to the start and space this out a little bit and change up the style. So the name of the shoe should be much bigger. And let's add padding just to the left hand side. Okay, and also let's align the cross-axis alignment to the start. Okay, this is looking pretty good. Now I'm just going to add a quick divider at the bottom just to give it some space. Cool, so now it's time for us to create a new model called cart. So I'm going to create a class here, and just a bit of a plan again. We want a list of shoes that are for sale. We want the list of items that the user put in the cart, and then a couple of methods. So a couple get methods, so getting the list of shoes for sale and getting what's in the cart. And then what the user can manipulate is adding items to the cart as well as removing items from the cart. So this should be the functionality of the app. So starting with the shoe shop, it should be a list of shoes. I'm just going to create the 4 different shoes that we have. Okay, so the Zoom Freak, let's say the price is $236. And then for the description, I'm just getting this off the Nike website, but you can put in, you know, any bit of text here. And the image path is where our shoe is. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and fill this out for the 4 different shoes that we've got. So we've got the Air Jordans, the Zoom Freak, which we started with, then the Kyrie and KD trays. So yep, let me just go ahead and fill this out. Cool. Now the list of items in the user's cart. So again, this is also a list of shoes, and for the user cart, it'll be just blank at the beginning, nothing in the cart. And then we can also get the shoe list. So let's just return the shoe shop. And we can also get the user card. So let's just return the user card. And for the two methods that the user can manipulate is adding an item to the cart, which we would need to know which shoe that they're adding. And then also same thing for the removing. So let me know if you have any problem understanding any bit of this code. Just comment below, I can help you out. Now I'm going to come back to my pubspec.yaml and I'm going to import this package called provider, which is a very simple common state management in Flutter. So I'm just going to do the sort of setting up here. So in the main function, let's wrap this in the change notifier provider. And coming back to the cart model, let's extend the change notifier and also notify the listeners anytime we need to update the state. Cool. So we need this to sort of deal with having a lot of different states in a few different pages, like the cart as well as the shop page. So if you come to our shop page, we can now wrap everything in a consumer. So that we can consume the data. So if you look at this value, we can say, okay, coming to the list builder here, this one right here, we kind of manually input it in, right? So what I'm going to do is instead of this part, let's get value, let's get the shoe list, let's look at the index, okay? And the index is going from 0 to the item count that was specified. Cool, and there it is. One thing I can just see in the shoe tile, I should add some padding here. Wait, now this plus button, we need to make it clickable. So let's wrap this in a gesture detector. Sweet, now if I come back to my shoe tile, we have a onTap function. So let's add shoe to cart and let's give it an individual shoe. So we haven't created this method, so let's come to the top and let's create the adding the shoe to cart method. So we've created it, we just need to access it using our provider. So you can see here the add item to cart and then we can just give it the shoe. Now one thing sort of good user experience is you should let the user know something happened. So if you added it to the cart, let's just create a show dialog and say successfully added. Okay, so let's check this out. Yay, there it is. Cool, and then now if I come back to my cart, we should display it here. So let's go to your cart page. And let's use a consumer. And we're going to create a column here. So let's just have a bit of a heading here that says my cart. And then below that, after some space, let's have an expanded list view. So expanded will just fill up the rest of the space. And in the list view, let's do something similar. Let's get each shoe and return the cart item. So we can get the individual shoe from the user cart. Okay, and return the cart item. So this one, I'm going to actually separate out the code in a different file. I'm just going to create it in my components. And so the cart item, when given a shoe, let's create a little tile here to display in the cart page. So I'm just going to use a list tile again. And for the leading, let's put in a little image of the shoe. Okay, and also let's display the shoe name and also the price underneath it. Okay, so if I save this, I can add it, and it looks like we have a bit of an error, and that's because we didn't do an item count. So let's get the user's cart and just the length of the user's cart. Cool, and you can see if I add it like in the cart, we have it. So if I add another shoe, then we have it in the cart as well. So there it is. Now let's just decorate this up real quick. Add some margin and the border radius. Those are the main things that I like to decorate. Cool, now one thing is I need to change this cross-axis alignment. I need to add a deleting button. So in the trailing of this list tile, let's add in a icon button. And we need to allow the user to remove this item from the cart, right? So let's create this method. Oh, this one needs to go in an icon. Cool, so let's use a provider and access our method that we created before. And give it the shoe. And there it is, there's our delete button. So now we can delete. So we can add, and we got the shoes here, and we can also remove them. Cool, and so that's the basic functionality that's done. So I think the app aesthetically also looks pretty good. So let me know what you guys think. If you made it this far into the course, congratulations. That type of perseverance and work ethic is what will make you a good coder. I hope you learned a lot during this course, and before I send you off, I just wanted to give a few final ideas and thoughts. The first thing is, with any skill, it takes time to gain expertise. So the most important thing is that you are coding consistently. Make it a daily habit to code a little bit every day. And the second thing is, start small and build. It's good to have ambitious goals, but to get there, we have to start collecting small wins under our belt. The most common way for people to lose interest is if it's too difficult. So try to aim for a flow state level of challenge. Just hard enough to keep you interested and just easy enough that you can continue making progress. And thirdly, the internet and AI are your friends. As Naval Ravikant says, the resources to learn are abundant, but the desire to learn is scarce. There is something to be said about someone who is curious and self-motivated. They have the ability to just figure things out. And that's actually the most important skill in coding and programming. The ability to just figure things out without waiting for someone else to teach them. And finally, if you like this style of content, you should definitely check out my YouTube channel @MitchCoco for more Flutter content and tutorials. Good luck with your coding journey. Peace.